All right. Hi, everyone, again. Today, we are going to be thinking a little bit about education in general and the purpose of education, our experience with education, schools, and kind of our belief system and our belief system and values regarding the purpose of education just in general. And so I'm going to share a quote with you today by a man named James Baldwin. And James Baldwin is not the only one to express a particular view like this, but I just really liked this quote. And before we get into this particular quote, I just want to introduce you to the man who was James Baldwin. And so James Baldwin was born in 1924, died in 1987. And so if you think about that time in our country's history, that he was really born during a time of high segregation, of Jim Crow laws, and racial discrimination and segregation, not only, but very much by law, right? And so James Baldwin was an American novelist, meaning he wrote books, fictional. He was a playwright. He was an essayist, meaning that he wrote nonfiction as well, a poet, and very much a civil rights activist. And his writings explored the intricacies of identity, really, of racial identity, sexual identity, class identity, so distinctions between rich and poor, and really oftentimes criticized Western society and was very critical of the U.S., was very critical of societies, but also very much of an activist, believing that we could do better. And that is who he was. So the quote here, I'm going to read this quote to you. You will be able to see it in your discussion post. You'll be able to see it on your screen. And so you'll be able to go back and analyze it and to read it and reread it, because it's kind of a heavy quote. It's not an easy one to understand, but I'm going to try to break it down as much as I possibly can for you. So James Baldwin said in a particular speech in 1963 that the purpose of education, excuse me, wait, eye is bothering me. Okay, so I'm going to start over. The purpose of education, finally, is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for himself, to make his own decisions, to say to himself, this is black or this is white, to decide for himself whether there is a God in heaven or not, to ask questions of the universe, and then to learn to live with those questions is the way that he achieves his own identity. But no society is really anxious to have that kind of person around. What societies really ideally want is a citizenry, or a group of people, which will simply obey the rules of society. Okay? So there's really kind of two parts to this quote. The first one is what he believes the purpose of education is. And then this concept that people don't really want that to happen in education. So let's read parts of it again. So he says the purpose of education. He believes the purpose of education, whether that be schools or we're taught by our parents or however we get our education. He believes the purpose is for people to be able to make their own decisions, to think their own thoughts, to learn, but also to then decide what they believe, who they are, okay? To question the universe, to question the world, and then to learn to live with those questions, and then through questioning, create your own identity, right? So that's what he's saying, that he believes that the purpose of education is. But then the second part, this second part of this quote says, but no society, no country, no city, no government wants that type of person. They don't want people to question society, right? What they really want is they want people to obey the rules. Follow the rules, do what you're told, and don't speak out. So, there's a lot to this. But you're going to be asked some questions. And so you do need to kind of really understand the quote here in order to answer these questions. But you're going to answer these discussions on a discussion board. The questions go like this. According to Baldwin, what is the purpose of education? Okay, so that first question is really just summarizing or understanding the first part of that quote. The second question is, do you agree with this? Why or why not? So the second part of the second question is, do you agree with James Baldwin's belief on what the purpose of education is? The third question, how does this purpose of education conflict with the goals of society and schools? So how does this purpose, how is it different than what he says schools and society really want out of their people? And then you need to think about your own experiences. What are your experiences with school? What are your experiences with education? Do you believe that education or schools are providing the type of education that Baldwin believes we should have? Or are our schools, are our education really just telling students to obey? Do this and you will have success. Okay? Or are we creating a system in which people are allowed to question, which they're allowed to think for themselves? Okay? So explain your answer in the last question. Okay? Once again, please reach out to me if you have any questions. I also have office hours if you'd like to ever work with me. All right? Have a good day.